You order a steak without thinking twice. You might order chicken, fish, lamb, maybe even venison if it's on the menu. But almost nobody walks into a restaurant hoping for lion, or wolf, or eagle, or crocodile. The strange part is that you absolutely could eat them. Their muscles are made of the same proteins. Their meat contains the same calories. Your stomach wouldn't suddenly reject it because the animal happened to have sharp teeth. So, why don't you? The obvious answer is that predators are dangerous to hunt. But the real answer is far stranger. Because for hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors weren't just looking for food. They were making economic decisions with every hunt. And predators were usually one of the worst investments in nature. That sounds almost backwards. After all, predators spend their lives eating meat. Shouldn't that make them the best meat to eat? Instead, evolution quietly built a food chain where almost every level exists to feed the level above it, except the very top. Imagine a field full of grass. The grass captures sunlight and turns it into energy. A rabbit eats the grass. A fox eats the rabbit. A wolf eats the fox. Each step sounds simple, but something invisible disappears every single time energy moves upward. Ecologists call this trophic efficiency. The name sounds complicated. The idea isn't. Roughly 90% of usable energy is lost every time food moves from one level of the food chain to the next. Some becomes heat. Some keeps muscles moving. Some powers organs. Some simply never becomes edible tissue in the first place. By the time the wolf has eaten enough foxes, and the foxes have eaten enough rabbits, and the rabbits have eaten enough grass, an enormous amount of energy has already vanished. The wolf is standing on top of a pyramid that has become incredibly narrow. This idea was famously described by ecologist Raymond Lindemann in the 1940s, and has become one of the foundations of modern ecology. It means predators are surprisingly scarce. There simply isn't much of them. A forest can support thousands of deer. The same forest might support only a handful of wolves. That isn't because wolves are weak. It's because every wolf requires an enormous amount of prey to stay alive. So if you're a prehistoric hunter trying to feed your family, what makes more sense? Chasing the animal that spends all day eating plants, or chasing the animal that spends all day chasing that animal? One of them is basically walking solar energy. The other is an expensive middleman. Your ancestors didn't need ecology textbooks to figure this out. Natural selection did the math for them. Generation after generation, people who spent their energy hunting large herbivores brought home more food than people who wasted days tracking dangerous carnivores. Eventually, this became less of a conscious choice and more of a cultural pattern. Around the world, the menu started looking strangely similar. Bison, deer, reindeer, antelope, wild cattle, goats, sheep, camels, animals that eat plants. Of course, there are exceptions. People have eaten bears. People eat crocodiles in some regions today. Shark is eaten in Iceland. Lion has occasionally been hunted. Even dogs have been eaten during periods of famine or ritual in some cultures. Humans will eat almost anything under the right circumstances. But notice something. These animals are almost never staples. They're novelties, emergency foods, status foods, ceremonial foods. Not the everyday source of calories that built civilizations. That's because calories were everything. Before supermarkets, before refrigeration, before agriculture, every hunt was a gamble. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham has argued that gaining reliable access to energy shaped nearly every stage of human evolution, from larger brains to cooking itself. Your ancestors couldn't afford romantic hunts. They needed profitable ones. Now another problem appears. Predators are often lean, very lean. A wolf spends its life running. A leopard climbs. An eagle flies. They burn enormous amounts of energy simply staying alive. That means they usually carry less fat than herbivores of similar size. Fat mattered, far more than most people realize today. Fat isn't just calories. It's concentrated survival. 1 gram of fat contains more than twice the energy of 1 gram of protein. During harsh winters or long migrations, fat could determine whether someone survived until spring. This is one reason prehistoric hunters prized animals that became incredibly fat during certain seasons. Think of mammoths. Think of bison. Think of seals in Arctic cultures. These weren't just large animals. They were walking energy reserves. Predators, meanwhile, were often muscular but relatively lean. Eating nothing but lean meat can even become dangerous. Modern researchers sometimes call this protein poisoning or rabbit starvation. Explorer Vilhjalmur Stefansson described people becoming sick when forced to survive almost entirely on extremely lean meat, despite technically eating enough food. Your body needs fat. Too much protein without enough fat or carbohydrates creates serious metabolic problems. Ironically, eating only meat isn't necessarily enough. It depends which animal that meat comes from. Then there's the risk. Imagine standing in tall grass 100,000 years ago. Ahead of you is a grazing antelope. Next to it is a lion. Both are edible. Only one is trying to eat you back. Even if your group successfully killed the lion, injuries carried enormous consequences. There were no antibiotics, no trauma surgeons. A deep bite wasn't just painful. It could become a death sentence weeks later. Evolution doesn't reward bravery. It rewards survival. Behavioral ecologists often describe this using optimal foraging theory. The idea was developed by researchers including Eric Charnoff. Animals naturally evolve towards strategies that maximize energy gained while minimizing energy spent and danger encountered. Humans are animals, remarkably clever animals, but still animals. Your ancestors weren't trying to win trophies. They were trying to come home. There's another reason predators rarely became dinner: disease. This one is surprisingly modern. The closer another predator is to you biologically, the more likely it shares parasites and pathogens that can infect you. Carnivores accumulate parasites from every prey animal they consume. Some parasites actually become more concentrated higher up the food chain. It's similar to how mercury accumulates in large predatory fish like tuna and swordfish today. Every meal leaves traces. Over years, those traces build up. Biologists call this biomagnification. The higher an animal sits on the food chain, the more certain toxins and contaminants can accumulate inside its body. Predators don't just inherit calories. They inherit chemical baggage. That doesn't make every predator dangerous to eat, but it shifts the balance even further. More risk, less reward. Again and again. Evolution points in the same direction. Eat lower on the food chain. Interestingly, domestication followed exactly this logic. Think about the animals humans eventually brought under control. Cows, sheep, goats, chickens, ducks, all of them efficiently convert plants into food. Now imagine trying to domesticate wolves for meat. First you have to feed the wolves. To feed the wolves, you first have to raise enormous numbers of herbivores. Then you feed those herbivores to the wolves, only to get fewer calories back than if you had simply eaten the herbivores yourself. It's an ecological financial disaster. That's why livestock almost always consists of herbivores or omnivores with efficient diets. Nature had already optimized the accounting long before economics existed. The strange thing is that none of this required your ancestors to understand biology. Nobody needed to calculate energy pyramids. Nobody needed to know what a calorie was. Generation after generation, the people who consistently chose the safer, fatter, more abundant prey simply left behind more descendants. The strategy survived because they did. And once that strategy became culture, something else happened. People stopped seeing certain animals as food at all. Think about how quickly your own brain categorizes animals. Cow? Food? Chicken? Food? Pig? Food in many cultures. Wolf? Not food. Tiger? Definitely not food. Eagle? Beautiful. Lion? Danger. Those reactions feel obvious, but they're mostly learned. If you had been born into another place or another time, that invisible menu inside your head could have looked completely different. Anthropologist Marvin Harris spent much of his career arguing that many food traditions begin with practical ecological reasons before eventually becoming cultural rules. Over enough generations, the original reason often disappears. The rule stays. Sometimes that's exactly what happened with predators. If hardly anyone hunts wolves because they're dangerous, scarce, lean, and expensive to kill, eventually children grow up never seeing wolf meat served. By adulthood, it doesn't even register as food anymore. The decision becomes invisible. This happens all over the world. Most people in North America don't think about eating horses. Many people in Central Asia do. Many Westerners would never consider insects. Around 2 billion people worldwide already eat them regularly. The line between food and not food isn't drawn by biology alone. Culture finishes the job. Predators simply had biology working against them from the very beginning. But there is another twist. Sometimes humans deliberately hunted predators, not because they were hungry, because they were afraid. A wolf that repeatedly attacked livestock wasn't just another animal. It threatened an entire community's food supply. A tiger near a village could change how people collected water or gathered firewood. A lion could reshape daily life. In those situations, killing the predator wasn't about dinner. It was about removing competition. Notice the order. First, the predator dies. Only then does anyone ask whether the meat is worth keeping. Very often it wasn't. The hide mattered more. The teeth became necklaces. The claws became symbols. The skull became a trophy. The animal's value came from what it represented, not what it tasted like. That's another clue. Humans almost always found better sources of calories elsewhere. Even today, when hunting is no longer necessary for survival in many countries, predator meat remains surprisingly uncommon. Part of that is law. Many large predators are protected because their populations are small. Part of it is economics. Raising a lion for meat would be absurdly expensive compared with raising cattle. But another part is psychology. You probably feel more empathy toward a wolf than toward a sheep. Why? One reason may be that predators remind you of yourself. They have forward-facing eyes. They solve problems. They stalk. They cooperate. They make decisions. Some predators even display forms of planning and social learning that feel strangely familiar. Your brain notices those similarities, even if you never consciously think about them. Research by psychologist Paul Rosen has shown that disgust isn't just about avoiding disease. It's also shaped by ideas, symbolism, and emotion. People often reject perfectly edible foods because of what they represent rather than what they contain. A spider-shaped piece of candy can make someone hesitate. A drink poured into a brand new bedpan becomes disgusting, despite remaining chemically identical. The story surrounding food changes the experience of eating it. Predators carry stories, power, violence, competition, sometimes even admiration. That emotional baggage matters. Then there's taste. People often assume predators must taste incredible because they eat meat. Reality says otherwise. Diet changes flavor. Animals that browse on grasses and herbs store different compounds in their muscles and fat than animals living on flesh. Many hunters describe carnivore meat as stronger, gamier, or carrying flavors that require special preparation. Bear meat, for example, can vary dramatically depending on what the bear has been eating. A bear feeding on berries may taste very different from one feeding heavily on fish. Wild predators don't spend their lives producing tender meat. They spend their lives surviving. Every mile traveled builds muscle. Every chase changes texture. Compare that with domestic cattle that have been selectively bred for thousands of years specifically to produce large amounts of flavorful, well-marbled meat. Humans didn't just choose herbivores. Humans reshaped them. Over thousands of years, selective breeding turned wild animals into calorie-producing machines. Cows became larger. Chickens laid more eggs. Sheep grew thicker wool while still providing meat. Everything moved toward efficiency. Predators never entered that system because they failed the first calculation. Feed required, risk required, calories returned. The numbers simply never worked. And yet there is one predator humans eat constantly. One predator found in almost every supermarket. One predator whose success reveals everything. Fish. Specifically, many carnivorous fish. Tuna, salmon, cod. So why do they escape the rule? Because the ocean plays by different rules. Marine food webs can be extraordinarily productive. Fishing often allows humans to catch large predators without physically wrestling them. Nets, hooks, boats, and later industrial fishing transformed the equation. The danger became manageable. Even then, the same ecological pattern quietly returns. The largest predatory fish often contain the highest levels of mercury because of biomagnification. Health agencies frequently recommend limiting consumption of certain apex fish for exactly this reason. Even in the ocean, climbing higher up the food chain comes with hidden costs. The pattern never really disappears, it just changes form. Look closely enough, and the question itself begins to flip. The mystery isn't why humans avoid eating predators. The mystery is why anyone expected predators to become food in the first place. They're rare. They're dangerous. They're lean. They're expensive. They're often chemically burdened, they're difficult to farm. They're poor investments in almost every ecological currency that mattered throughout human history. So, evolution quietly nudged your ancestors toward a simpler answer. Eat what the predators are eating. Skip the predator. Thousands of generations later, you can walk through an entire supermarket without noticing that almost every aisle is built on that same ancient rule. The beef, the chicken, the pork, the lamb, even the milk and cheese. Nearly everything traces back to animals living lower on the food chain. The menu surrounding you isn't random. It's the final chapter of an evolutionary calculation that began long before cities, farming, or even language. So the next time you order a steak without thinking twice, remember that the real decision wasn't made in the restaurant. It was made by countless ancestors who discovered, one successful hunt at a time, that the smartest predator rarely eats another predator. If you watched all the way to the end, chances are you're fascinated by the hidden evolutionary rules that still shape your everyday life. Subscribe to support the channel and help more videos like this find their way into your feed. And here's something I'd love to know. If you had the chance to try lion, wolf, or crocodile meat, would you? Or would something in your brain tell you not to? Let me know in the comments. You might discover that your answer was decided hundreds of thousands of years ago.